Welcome to another edition of That Didn't Feel Right. So what was it that didn't feel right? My belt. It didn't really feel right in that last mud hole I got stuck in at Royal Blue that almost swallowed my razor. Now the belt didn't break, and I did ride the rest of the day and the next day on it, but it certainly could have suffered some minor damage. I don't have a spare, and with a trip to Windrock planned in a couple of weeks, I thought this would be a perfect time to upgrade to a belt from SuperATV. This is a Gates G-Force C12. The C stands for carbon, meaning carbon tensile cords that are bonded inside of the belt. And what does that mean exactly? When I get that one off, we'll do a side-by-side comparison and I'll explain. But quickly, let me go over the steps to getting this cover off on just a few fine points. You know I like the details. This is not going to be a minute and a half long video like you might find, but if you're not going to have this unless you've done your snorkels exactly like mine. This is one of my, this is the belt exhaust snorkel tube. Going to be removing that. And then you also may or may not have this secondary clutch intake tube. It's improved cooling on some machines that they have. What I'm going to do is remove the clamps from this tube, take it off, and then we'll remove the clamp from this tube and move it out of the way. And then remove the screws around the outer edge of the clutch housing so it can come off. What I've got here is a 5/16 socket. It will actually fit all the clamps and the clutch cover bolts. So this is pretty much the only tool you need to get most of this job done. Alright, now to remove this secondary clutch intake, all you have to do is loosen the clamp and it will wiggle right off. And I'll just kind of push it up here out of the way. Just to make it easier and just to show you the proper way, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this little grease fitting real quick. And the next step is to remove these 8 cover screws. Now if you're on a 800 doing this, you're going to have a whole lot harder time getting to these screws than you do on the newer 900s and 1000s. Pretty much every razor made now except for probably the 570s. One quick note I'd like to make is you can do this with the tire on. It is possible, but it is much more difficult. Alright, with all the cover screws out and that grease fitting out of the way, you can take this cover on off. It comes off pretty easy now. Just kind of lift it up a little bit and then pull that side out, and literally it just comes out so easy. If that grease fitting is still there, that becomes a whole new ball game. It turns into a wrestling match. But we can see the primary clutch here is tied directly to the engine's crankshaft. Here's your secondary clutch that connects directly to your transmission input shaft. Here we have the belt. Now if you had destroyed the belt, it came apart on you, then it obviously won't be right there. It'll be in a million pieces, and which will be all up inside the belt exhaust tube. If you don't have a snorkel like this, see, what I would do is just take this bottom tube off and empty out all the belt parts and make sure that this was clear. But if you have the factory exhaust tube, it just goes right over here behind the seats. You can pull that access panel off and reach your arm up in there and clean out that tube of belt debris. If you don't and you replace the belt, you're not going to get good ventilation through here, and the next one will shred in just a matter of minutes probably. You could also have strings wrapped all around your primary clutch, maybe behind it back here. There could even be some in the secondary. If that's the case, the only way to get them out is to remove both of these clutches. In my experience, it is okay to run the machine long enough to get it off the trail and back to your trailer or wherever you're going to work on it at. It's not gonna really hurt anything to run it with them strings in there, but you don't want to leave them, because eventually it will wear a hole in this cover and you don't want that. There are several different ways to get this belt off when it's in one piece. If you have a clutch that has engine braking, you'll actually have these white plastic rollers that are in here, and there's a nice groove in the side of the clutch. That tool that the machine comes with, you can stick it in there and pry that open, and it separates this clutch and gives it all kind of slack, and it just comes right off. I don't have that luxury. I don't have engine braking, unfortunately. None of my machines ever have, except my very first one, and I always have to go back and add it later. The easiest way to get this thing off without taking all this stuff apart is just kind of pull on it at the bottom while you roll it, and as it builds pressure, the belt will begin to go inside the clutch and open it up just a little bit, and then it will start to feed off the side of this clutch, and then you can just keep rolling it around, roll it around and keep pulling on it until it comes free. You gotta get it past this hole right up here that catches on it, and then you pull it off the primary, and there you have it. And one quick note here: when you take this belt off, pay attention to the way the words are oriented, the direction they're facing. Usually when you take the belt off, the letters will be in a way that you can read them. There have been cases apparently where the belt is put on backwards and the letters are upside down. This doesn't matter when it's new, but it will matter if you take this belt off and put it back on. You want it back in the same direction it was. I got the belts on my table so we can do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. There's some obvious physical differences. But the main difference I want to point out, and I know it's going to be hard to see with this little GoPro camera, but there's a line that runs all the way around the outside edge of this belt. It's pronounced more in some areas, and some areas it kind of fades out. And it's going to be the same way on both sides, and all the belts of this type are going to have this same thing. What that is the cords that are inside this belt. That is the edge of them actually peeking out the side here. Now, under a really heavy load or a really hard acceleration, it is possible for the clutch to grab these cords and actually rip them out the side of the belt and cause it to fail almost immediately. These belts do not have that. The carbon tensile cords that are bonded inside the rubber of this belt, you don't have to worry about them failing in this way. The main advantage, now any belt can fail. I'm not going to say that these belts will not fail. It can if it's misused. But the main advantage is if it does fail, you will not have what looks like half a mile of string just wrapped around one or both of your clutches inside that you got to then spend an hour taking the clutches off and digging all that stuff out of there. This will be in pieces, but all you have to do is just scoop the pieces out and put another one on and you're good to go. And before we put the new belt on, you want to check your clutches, especially on the inside of the shoes, to make sure that there's no cracks in them or ridges that are worn into them, rough spots, anything of the sort. If they're all okay, I recommend cleaning this housing out. I take air compressor and just kind of blow the clutches out real good. Also pull this little rubber seal out, clean around this housing, clean the seal up itself, and then just put a light film of waterproof grease on that seal when I put it back in to help make sure that the housing remains as watertight as possible. Now, if you do remove this seal, make sure that you don't damage it or poke a hole in it when you're trying to pull it out. I got a nice coating of grease, waterproof grease on this seal. I'm going to carefully start reinserting it with the yellow stripe to the outside edge, because that's how it was when I took it out. Just very carefully, without letting it touch the clutches, just feed it back in all the way around. A film of grease will keep that seal lubricated, moisturized, keep it from drying out, cracking, and also help keep it watertight. So you get in, water deep enough to use your snorkels, it won't just run around that seal and get straight into your housing. Now it's time to go ahead and put the new belt in. A lot of people recommend that you actually wash the new belt in mild detergent and water, just to get the oily residue off of it that it may have. Obviously, if you're one of those people that keep this thing zip tied to your roll bar on your machine and you just slap it in when the other one blows, then you're not going to be too worried about that. But This is an in-shop install, so there's no reason not to do it. I went ahead and washed this one up, and as you can see, it's still a little damp, but yeah, it'll be plenty dry by the time I actually get ready to fire it up. So we're just gonna roll it back onto the primary and be real careful not to let it touch anything so it gets grease on it. Now, it could be that we're not going to be able to roll this on the secondary because this is a new belt and it's a different type of belt. It's pretty stout. So, yeah, that's pretty tight. My other one came off so easy because it had a little bit of wear on it. It kind of dropped down into the clutch further. As you can see, this one still got a little ways to go. I may not be able to do this in this way. So in that case, what we may want to do is just go ahead and remove this front half of the secondary clutch. It will separate, and then the belt can just be stuck in there, and then you put this right back on and torque it down. The easy way to hold this thing to keep it from turning while you take this bolt loose is put the machine in gear, and then get something to wedge the brake pedal down, or get somebody to hold it for you. This bolt does not really have a whole lot of torque on it. Our trusty 15mm socket will fit it. And just back that bolt out. Before you get too far, take note of that mark that's right there on that clutch. It's pointing right toward my primary. You want to make sure it's in the same direction when you put this back on. It can be 180 degrees off, and that will cause you problems. So make sure it goes back on the same way it comes off. Also note there's Loctite on this bolt, and you want to make sure that you put some more on it when you put this back in. Alright, with the bolt out, we'll just go ahead and slide this front half of the clutch off. It'll just separate. Now note there's a washer right up in there. It's actually just kind of a spacer. You want to make sure that stays in place. Make sure this half of the clutch stays where it is. Don't turn it. And when you put this back on, make sure your mark is facing the same direction it was. Alright, now we'll go ahead and start feeding this belt back around the primary. Just kind of hold it in place over the secondary there. I blew this out real good while I had it apart, and go ahead and take the front half of the secondary and start putting it back in place. It doesn't have to be exact because it's only 180 degrees. These things can be off. So as long as you're in the neighborhood, you should be able to wiggle them back together. Now your belt is going to try to keep you from putting it all the way back together. So at this point, you're just going to have to go ahead and start threading in the bolt. And once you do that, you can put the machine in neutral and start rolling this clutch around as you tighten it up to get everything back in the neutral position. Pull the blue thread locker back on here and put it back in. And just keep tightening the bolt down as you keep rolling the clutch around. Obviously I've got the brakes off and I've got the machine back in park. And as you can see, as I keep tightening this bolt, the belt's getting tighter. Alright, this bolt is good and bottomed out. That means the clutch is fully seated. All we have to do is torque this bolt down and then fire it up and test it out. Alright, I got the razor back in gear and I got the brakes locked, so I'm going to go ahead and torque this bolt down. It's 38 foot-pounds. And with the machine back in park, I'm going to go ahead and fire it up and cycle the clutches a little bit, check everything out, and make sure it's good to go before I put the cover back on it. everything seems to check out. I'm gonna go ahead and retorque this bolt one more time since I ran it just a little bit, make sure it's on good. I have had this bolt back out once on one of my other razors, and it backed out on Jeremy's last time we were in Windrock and tore his belt up. So I'm gonna triple check that bolt, and I'm gonna put the cover back on it, put the wheel back on it, and then take it out there and run a few laps around my woods course to break the belt in. Once it is brand new, once it gets broke in a little bit, it'll actually roll a little smoother and run a little smoother. Basically what I like to do is just go out for about half an hour and just ride easy. Just vary your speed a little bit, no hard acceleration, no heavy load on the machine, no hill climbing, mud bogging. I don't even run it in high, I just keep it in low, run it easy for about 30 minutes, and that should seat the belt good and kind of wear it into the clutches, and after that it'll be time to hit the trails. Be real careful when you tighten down these screws. It doesn't take much to seat this housing, and these screws will strip out pretty easy. I got my clutch on my little drill here set pretty soft. As you tighten them up, kind of do it in a pattern like you would on lug nuts on a wheel, so that you spread the pressure around evenly. Now reach up in there and you can feel between the two halves of the housing. Make sure there's no gap. If there's a gap there, you don't have them tight enough. If they're fully seated, then they're tight enough and you don't need to crank down on them anymore. I'm about halfway through the break-in cycle on this new belt, and I can already tell the difference. I'm getting some great throttle response compared to the old one. And once again, I'd like to thank SuperATV for offering such great, affordable products for our machines. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the trails.